In this part of the tutorial, we're going to initialize a button and explain some differences. So it's important to know the differences between the two platforms. This is between iOS and Android because there are subtle but distinct differences. And it's also necessary in iOS to add the button handler, whereas that was not necessarily a need in Android. So we're going to add in the button handler directly, and I'm going to explain a couple of the differences, such as the lack of the need to initialize our different fields in iOS versus Android. Now let's add some kind of functionality to the app. If we go to main.storyboard, we have the nice layout, we have the names, and we have exactly what each field or button or label should do, but we haven't implemented any kind of functionality. Now, if we take a look at viewcontroller.cs, we can see a few things going on. There's some button handlers, and there is the viewDidLoad function, and there's a couple other things. Now, these, like the didReceiveMemory warning, we'll ignore, the viewController will ignore, and this button stuff will modify a little bit. So, unlike when we were developing in Android, we don't actually have to initialize each of the fields. So when we're working in Android, we just go back to main storyboard, we would have to initialize each of these fields, each text field, each button, and each label. And we'd have to tell them exactly, we'd have to tell the code exactly what to look for when referencing those. This is something we don't have to do in iOS. However, when dealing with buttons, there is an extra step that we need to handle. So what we're going to do is we go back to main storyboard, we select our button, if we double click it, then we see that the screen switches back to viewController.cs and gives us this option to add an event handler. So what we're going to do, it gives us a few options, select plus or minus to move it to another location, press enter to actually add the handler, or escape to cancel this. We're going to go ahead and press enter now, and there we go. We get this function created called button calculate and then touch up inside. So this will be what calls the functionality of the button. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of this code right here. So I'm just holding shift, selecting this. We're going to cut it, so take it out of there, and we're going to add it in here. I'm going to take out this throw exception because we don't need that. And now we have a little bit of a different setup. So in Android, we had all the initialization and the function calls started in what would be the equivalent of this function. However, in iOS, we only need this button calculate touch up inside function. This is where we're going to call what will happen with the buttons. So let's go ahead and modify this a little bit, because right now this is calling all these functions on button, which is the old button. This is the default button that was created when we just opened our main.storyboard. Our button, however, is called btn calculate. So let's go ahead and change that. So this is going to be btn calculate, and instead of my button, we're going to call this calculate button. Okay, and then same with this, we're going to change this to btn calculate, and this is not what we want to have happen, because this right now is just telling the button to display the number of clicks and to set the title. So we're going to get rid of this and add in our own functionality in a little bit. So this is pretty much all we need to do to set this up. We won't add the button functionality just yet, but just a few things to note. Again, there's this didReceiveMemory warning. We will ignore this. Sets this function, we'll ignore. We have the public override viewDidLoad, we'll ignore that. We don't need to know anything about that, and we will ignore this too. So the only parts we'll really be focusing on will be the button calculate underscore touch up inside and the following necessary functions. This in count will also get rid of because we no longer need it. In this part of the tutorial, we initialize the button and explain some differences. So this involved adding in the button handler and showing that in iOS we don't need to actually initialize and declare each of the fields that we add to the layout. So by now you should be able to add button handlers and explain some of the difference between Android and iOS development, namely the button handler and the need to initialize the different fields we added to the layout in Android but not in iOS.